Welcome back to another episode of Reality One. I'm Avram Raskin, and in this podcast, we talk about the practical use cases of augmented reality day to day. Today, we're going to be talking about education. We're going to be talking about what augmented reality would look like in a classroom. We're going to have two kind of areas. One is going to be indoors, inside the classroom, and if we have enough time, we'll also go outdoors into the yard and different classes outside of like the regular classroom. In today's episode, we're joined by Shif Bacha. Do you want to give us a little bit of a intro, background of yourself? Maybe tell us what you know about augmented reality, or any question, I guess, that you have in this podcast that you would like to have answered by the end.
Okay. Firstly, thank you for having me here. Good to be here. My name is Shif. When you reached out, I had to do a little bit of background into AR because it isn't something that I'm too familiar with. But the topic of education was quite interesting to me. I've been a teacher for a couple of years in South Africa. It had always looked a certain way, quite linear. And then having learned a little bit about what the possibilities are of AR in just a general sense, I just felt excited to step into this conversation with you to learn more about it. So I guess it's a bit open-ended. It's not a specific question, but I'm excited to learn and to hear more.
I've got to be on my best behavior.
But I'm the student today.
You're the student today. What we can do starting off with augmented reality is give a tiny bit of a background and set the scene of what augmented reality is or where we're going to be sitting. And for you guys who have been listening to the last, 8 episodes now, the guest has a very special place in this podcast. It's more to be the audience's advocate. So anytime that you want to get a description or a better definition, or if some of the ideas prompts more ideas in your head, feel free to jump in. So let's give a background of augmented reality. First of all, we're going to fast forward into the world where augmented reality is built into glasses or contact lenses. So your hands are always going to be free, and this is going to be something that you are going to forget is there. It's very different than what augmented reality is today, where you're looking through an iPad, or you're holding something beefy, or you're wearing something heavy or uncomfortable on your head like Apple Vision Pro. What is augmented reality? In a very brief, and hopefully we'll get more clarification as we go into the episode, but augmented reality is the idea of overlaying digital content on top of the real world. It doesn't just have to be 3D holograms that are running around the world. And it's certainly not just floating iPads. Augmented reality is a spectrum. Well, virtual reality, augmented reality are on the spectrum. You've got base reality. You and I are here. If we discount any computers or screens in the room, this is base reality. We see what's in the physical world. Virtual reality is when we're going to chuck on a pair of goggles, block ourselves out from the world, ideally block out every single sense. So your eyes, your ears, everything like that is going to be totally immersed into a virtual world. Augmented reality, on the other hand, you're still currently in the world, but you're anywhere from base reality to virtual reality while still being in the world. So it can be as simple as having a small screen. Arguably, a phone or a watch could be augmented reality, but that's the low end. And you can get to a point where you're so immersed that you nearly forget you're in the world, but you're still very much in the world. So that spectrum is quite wide. We're going to touch upon a different part of that spectrum. What else can we say of a background of augmented reality? Is that a broad enough definition to get started, or do you have any questions before we dive into some ideas?
No, that was a great description. I think it speaks to me a bit more than virtual reality because we are living in the real world. And so it's kind of the blend between the two.
Yep.
The real world that we have, not taking us out of it completely into virtual, but just still bringing in that enhancement, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think one thing also I probably should mention before we get in is that the digital world that we know today is a 2D world. So we're used to this paradigm of 2D interfaces. Getting caught up in that where some people place 2D information into the augmented world and replace the old world, where you have a MacBook screen here that's sitting on your desk, 15 inches. So with augmented reality, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a floating screen next to it, and voila, that's augmented reality. Technically, yes, it is. It's augmenting onto your reality. But I think that when we look into these practical use cases, we want to get beyond that. Some things we definitely will look at 2D instances and ideas, but we want to get beyond this idea of everything has to be forced into this 2D interface, whether it's horizontal or virtual. We're in a spatial world. Let's embrace that.
Right.
So jumping into education, we're first going to get into the classroom. This is the first place we're going to sit down in. You could be anywhere, whether it's kindergarten or all the way up to high school, or you might be in a university classroom, wherever your brain takes you. And then we're going to get into the outdoor yard. So first in the classrooms, I'm going to run very quickly over different ideas that I've already written down. And then we're going to go into them and pick them apart and get
Sounds
juicy.
good.
First one is anatomical holograms. And that's all humans, animals, everything in between. Then we're going to look at something, practice writing letters, a window into another classroom. I like that one. That one is actually not my idea, but I'd like to explore it and see where we can go into. I saw it on a concept video quite a few years ago. 3D puzzles, building blocks, things like that. And then the last one I've got written down is animating inanimate objects. So think of a truck driving or a doll, a toy, getting a personality. So those are a few things that I've written down. Let's jump back into anatomical holograms. There's a few companies that do this now. One is Illumis AR. They do things like this. To start off, we can think of human body. The way that we work nowadays, let's say you're in science class. You've got a textbook in front of you and you've got images, flat 2D images, very hard to understand. We all know what 3D images would look like. One thing that we could do is have a lifelike human, like, you know, when you go to the doctor's office and they've got a skeleton sitting on the side.
Right.
Imagine if you had either a real skeleton, not necessarily a real human skeleton, but let's say a physical skeleton inside of your world. You could dress it up with different layers. So you might have, let's say, a virtual slider next to it, and you could see what it's like to start adding veins, then muscles, and then skin. And you could dial in between those and get granular into one or get back out of that. Each of these different organs, things like that, could also be named, labeled. You could also dive into different organs. And let's say you want to pull out the heart, and you can have a beating heart sitting in the palm of your hand. And as you move your hand around, it's almost as if you're holding a heart in your hands. And again, you can go in between layers. So whether that's cutting it down the side, whether that's stripping off layers, whether that's doing a surgical cut with your other hand, you do a little karate chop. And now you can see the blood flowing through it. You can see different colors. You have an entire representation. You're no longer stuck on a textbook or even a YouTube video, which might show you a 3D image, but to be able to pull that out, hold it, feel it pulsing. And then let's also jump back for a second. Augmented reality is not just vision. People think it's just vision, and that's because that's mostly what we've worked on. And vision is your primary sense of how you interact with reality. So people think augmented reality must be vision, but it's all your 5 senses. We could also make it that this heart, also you can feel the beat. So it's almost as if you're holding a real heart beating inside your hand. That's a few ideas of going in, getting out, seeing layers, learning different things, seeing how things move around. So you could see pathways, blood. You could think of also like dissecting a frog. In science class, you probably get a real frog, dissect it, you can see how the nerves work like that. Or you have it on a paper in your textbook. Being able to have a 3D representation on your desk where there's no actual real blood, or you don't actually have to get a frog, but have it feel like there's literally a frog on your desk where you can cut it and see how the nerves react. You can reanimate it. Once you cut it, you can rewind back in time and have it assemble itself back and jump off the table.
Yeah.
I think these kind of stuff that allow us to do science experiments without wasting resources, getting things dirty, or doing things that you can't normally do, which is like magic. Like you can never bring back a frog to life.
Right.
But augmented reality, I could have that fun between them, start the experiment again, see what it's like if I cut something else.
I think that's amazing. I've done dissections in university. I did many years of physiology and genetics. And so we did dissections. And what I'm hearing is such a huge benefit of this is that, say, I'm not just an audio learner, but I'm a visual learner.
Yep.
Then being able to see the process. I saw in university that really helped me, being able to cut open the kidney to understand how everything worked in a very visual way, to be able to apply all the knowledge that I had read about and really concretize it. As you said, with limited resources, especially with human dissection, it's not so simple unless you're in medicine or something like that. But this allows virtually everyone who has access to this to be able to really learn these things in depth and in a way that their optimal learning system, how it helps them.
How they
How it
best
works for
learn.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, people learn in different ways. And as you were talking, I'm like thinking like, there's so many like channels or things on YouTube that do ASMR. You could bring a lot of different parts into this. It doesn't have to be focused. When you're dissecting a real frog, reality works in one way, right? So you cut it a certain way, it's done. You can't go back. But here we can also focus on different things. We can amplify certain sound or different vibrations. There is quite a lot of things that we can do that you can't do on the real world. I don't even have to be focused on just dissecting the frog. I could have looked at the process of catching the frog. So maybe my classroom actually turns into a jungle and I go catching the frog or go on a hike and discover the frog in its natural habitat, catch it, virtually augmented, catch it, then do what I'm doing right now. And so we can give a backstory. We can really build up a visceral feeling. It doesn't have to be cut and dry, like just a laboratory feeling. There's so many ways you can go. It's unlimited of where this can take you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It really is. I think it's really powerful. Even thinking when I learned when we were doing genetics, and it's on a very molecular level, there's only so much that you can understand when you're reading off of a page on how when you have the two strands of DNA trying to interact, and when there's mutations and things move around and you're trying to visualize what that looks like and it's just linear on a page, it's really hard to do that. But if you can play around and be like, oh, I'm doing this, and then the result of that is X, Y, and Z. And then you can, as you said, you can move forward, you can move backwards, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can play around with it so much. Just the possibility of what you can learn just amplifies so much.
Two things I'm thinking about when you're saying that. One is that, I don't know if you've seen that video of someone sitting in a park and it zooms out into space, and every time it's like by a factor of 10. And then finally, once it gets to the observable universe, it zooms back in until you get back to the person. And then it zooms in and it goes in. That and Mrs. Frizzle. Did you have Mrs. Frizzle and the Magic School Bus, or Mrs. Frizz? I can't remember.
I'm familiar, but no, not so much.
This idea of being able to zoom out and zoom in is crazy. When I said before about going in and finding the frog, that's the context of like where the frog's from. But because it's a spatial world, I'm not limited to just hold something in my hands, as we have the heart or the frog or something on my desk. I'm not limited to a screen size of 6 or 7 inch phone or a 15-inch or a 20-inch 2D laptop. I can zoom in and out of any item. When I'm finished with the frog, I can actually zoom it up so the frog becomes the size of a puppy, and then the size of the classroom. And as I keep making the frog go bigger, I can now dive into the frog's mouth or see the innards from the inside or get it onto the molecular level, the cell level, and have a full-on field trip all within the class, all in the safety of the class, and learning the parts of what the teacher would like me to learn. But also now I can explore, and I'm exploring different worlds.
Right.
And it's still very much augmented reality. Now you can do this all virtual reality, where this part of diving into a frog and not caring about the world around you could very much be virtual reality. But the thing that pauses me over there is I don't like the image of a whole classroom of kids with these massive goggles strapped to their face. They can't see their other friends.
Right.
This idea of being able to do an activity together where even people don't have to be at desks anymore. The whole concept of desks, even in the office space, is very different. That was in the office episode. Being able to bring all the students together, maybe all the chairs are in a small little row, so they've constructed a little train. And now they all get to dive into the frog together. They're all experiencing together in a classroom. We can go down a rabbit hole or a frog's body. We have dissecting a frog, cadavers, things like that. Think about the brain, just like we said about the heart before. Think about holding a virtual brain in your hand and be able to study it, be able to rotate it, be able to see neurons firing, maybe having a chat and seeing something respond, but seeing what happens on the brain where someone else could be wired up, they've got an ECG or something, and you're able to like actually hold their brain, where it's not like 2D images on a screen. You're able to hold their brain and see which parts light up. You can go on a whole adventure. I think the whole idea of science experiments become crazy. I mean, I've watched one too many videos of a very interesting science teacher that does these crazy experiments, whether it's like in chemistry and they blow up or make these foam things go crazy, or physics teachers that take a bowling ball and show you how physics, if you hold a ball and give absolutely no energy to it, no extra energy, the ball will never go beyond where it started from, so you'll never get smashed in the face. You have so many science teachers that have such wild imaginations that I could only imagine what kind of science experiments they could bring into the classroom, animation and experiments and the entire size of the classroom, but also the safety. What kind of things can they think up where you have a classroom?
Yeah, it just becomes limitless. Also, especially if you're doing experiments on humans, which are ethically very complicated, and which is why research on humans, there's like a dearth of research, and we're always trying or doing retrospective studies because you can't harm another person in the name of science. But if it's augmented reality and you're diving into the brain and you're inducing some sort of drug psychosis and you're observing it, what goes on to the human brain, and in this state, that's safe. You're not playing around with someone who's actually in that space. Ethically, I don't know, maybe it would be another discussion, but like what the ethical implications of that would be. But no one's being harmed. It's all in the name of science. There could be amazing research that can come out of that.
Yeah, but the simulations, just for the advancement of everything in the computer, and also to use that dreaded buzzword AI, the kind of simulations, the kind of things that we can see, bringing them out into the real world only elevates them. Because we could do so many simulations on a flat screen, but be able to use the space around us, to be able to walk around something, poke and prod, using our 5 senses, where it's not just visuals, where we can poke something in midair where we think there's a brain, but feel it. We can feel some feedback, we can feel vibrations. It's almost like these items can exist around us. Anything about directions or paths that I can't see, I love that in augmented reality.
What do you mean?
One example is the brain, being able to see the brain firing. It's really electric pulses. You can't open up a skull and see the neuron firing. It's a simulation. But to be able to hold a virtual brain where it looks like it's a brain, but still get very accurate neural pulses or the direction of electricity. In a textbook, we just have arrows or things like that, or even magnetics. To be able to visualize would help a lot, not just like the direction of a magnet, but to see what does that actually look like on a different level? The idea of being able to see what we normally can't see, let's say gravity, magnetism, I think the 4 forces, being able to, in a certain way, visualize that, to me is very exciting because, again, I don't even know if I have words of how, well, I feel like I know how I would visualize magnetism, but I don't know how I would visualize even the strong force, the weak force. What does it mean to see gravity?
Right.
And I think that this would be really cool because now we're getting something visual that can exist in space. It's very spatial. What can we start seeing that we normally cannot see with our naked eye in front of us? That, to me, I think it would be interesting. I think I would also learn a lot more like about currents and voltages. Even today, I have a very hard time. And no matter how many times someone says, well, think about a hose and think about if the hose gets bigger and the amount of water you're pushing through. I think once that thing's around me, maybe it's because I'm a visual learner, but be able to see these animations, not just in a YouTube video, but see them around me and be able to picture them in something real. It doesn't have to be a simulation that someone's designed for me beforehand. Let's say a year ago, someone's designed a simulation and everyone's seeing the same thing. But because someone has explained how something works, when I look at a light and I look at a light switch, my system can show me that flow of electricity in my room.
Right.
Not a simulation that's just hovering in the world around me.
Right.
Being able to see that current, where's the resistors, how do they work? It's something that I still struggle with, and I feel like if I could see that happening in the real world when it's not staged for me and it's not hidden from my eyes, I think that to me, that would open up so many aspects. Imagine if you're struggling, for example, currents, voltages, amperages, and it's not just something that you see once in a 5-minute YouTube video, but now for the next day or for the next week, every time I look at any light or any computer, I see these things, the current, the draw, the amperage, all that on any wire I see or any wall. And it's just happening there in the background, subconsciously getting into my mind of going, I'm not actively thinking, okay, I'm getting taught right now. I happen to be walking to the office. I'm walking my dog. I'm rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. When those things are happening, whether it's magnets, whether electricity, whether it's Wi-Fi, things that I normally can't see or concepts that I struggle to grasp, if that is not limited to just the classroom or limited to a 40-minute period, but the teacher can say, this week we're really studying this thing, and I can see that Johnny and David are struggling. So for you, I'm going to assign for the next 3 days, whenever you look at cables or whenever you plug your phone into the wall or your TV, you're going to now see the hidden electricity in the background.
It's brilliant. it reinforces learning throughout their day. It also, as you said, like with virtual reality, they're not limited to goggles. They're not limited to their own experiences, not in isolation. The two boys can together have that shared experience, and also that creates connection, which reinforces learning.
Yeah, and imagine, let's say David's at home and he sees something and he finally gets it. He jumps up, he's like, oh my God, that looks super cool. And his family, meanwhile, is going, wait, we don't understand what you're looking at. And he can share it with them, explain to them what he's just unearthed and teach someone else and share someone else with his experience. And now that he's learned it in 5 different ways and 7 different experiences, he's now able to teach other people or share that with other people, reinforces learning, as you said. One of these things that for me is so exciting is also breaking out education, that it's not just limited, because I think we've come into a world where we've been taught that education is in that 40-minute period or 45-minute class and whenever homework has been assigned to you. What happens if your education stays with you on the way home? It's not something you actively have to think about. It's just passively there in the background. Your subconscious is soaking it all in, and you're understanding force, mass, all these different things just when you see someone walking their dog. And that's actually something I wanted to get once we go into the outdoors. It was one of the examples I wanted to touch upon in gym. So we're going to pause it for a second until we get into the gym class. But I think a huge thing is when we go beyond small little worlds and 2D worlds, which I think are very limited, at least the way that I work and seen it work in education, it's very much like this is the textbook, even if it's digital, or this is the YouTube video. To be able to start having something passively in the background, to be able to have something in our environment, to be able to have something that understands the context, the world around us, the experience that we're in, reinforce that learning in the background as we go day to day, I think is one of the biggest tools of moving us away from, well, education only happens in the classroom and in the homework.
Yeah.
And that to me is...
And the students are then part of the process, if I'm understanding it correctly, as you said, like they can play around with it. I think one of the tragedies in classrooms is that kids start out, let's say, playing with blocks, and they have these creative minds and they're building things, and it's all, all very interactive. And then they go to textbooks and very linear learning. But this keeps play, which is like the purest thing that we have as kids that kind of gets lost along the way. It kind of freezes it in time and allows us to then journey with that throughout life, because we're playing around with it and we're putting it into our, the electric currents in our cell phone chargers, and we're bringing it to different areas of our life. And so the curiosity that kids have that's lost is able to then be sustained through teenagehood, adolescence, and into adulthood, which could be amazing.
And I think it's also like, there's the common teenage thing. When am I ever going to use this in life? And I think there's a lot of things in school that you don't end up using. But there's a lot of things you end up using, but you don't realize what school has helped you. Your brain is doing complex algorithms, calculus in the background, and you don't even realize when you're driving a car and you're measuring the distance between you and another car to try figure out, can you make a certain gap? Or how fast are you speeding up until you're going to crash into a car? These kind of things you do in school, but you don't always apply them to the real world. But your brain's also doing these things just naturally. You don't realize that they are complex things. Jumping off from what you said of the blocks, when you're young, you're stacking blocks on top of each other, you're having play, you're being creative with other people. But when you get older, you can use those same blocks to teach you things like physics. But without uncovering what's invisible, we lose that opportunity to constantly learn and figure things out. So like we were saying, going home, being on a tram and seeing certain things, but imagine if playing with blocks and then as one tumbles, you're seeing an animation showing the different forces that acted upon that block that means it started here and ended up there. If I could show you what the outcome of something is before it happens, let's say I topple a block, and with computer vision, and I'll define computer vision in a second, but with that, I could probably show you exactly where the block is going to land with mathematics. Now, if I can show that to you a second before it lands, and you can see that, that seems exciting that mathematics can predict what something's going to happen. Now, I probably have more of an interest in learning what the force is that's acting upon that. What is gravity? What are all these things happening that my computer, or my system was able to see where the block would land precisely before it landed? Prediction for me is one of the coolest things. It's probably the coolest superpower. If I can show you how my computer can visualize that before it actually happens, I personally would at least go, wow, I want to figure out how did that happen? Teach me that. And then next time it happens, maybe I can see it with an arrow. Jumping to the gym class, an idea that I had is, when you're in gym, whether it's gymnastics or whether it's sports, you could marry maths and gymnastics with physics. Imagine if when somewhat you watching one of your classmates, do a somersault or do a triple flip, whatever it is. Imagine being able to see over their body the lines, the animations that show you the forces, the action, the angle of their legs, to be able to pause certain things and then see them still in midair. With my augmented reality, I can snap my fingers, pause them like you have in the movies, where the camera pauses and walks through, and then walk around them and have animated or augmented on top of their body little lines. Think of a whiteboard or a chalkboard, a digital one in midair, that can now show me, see their legs, that is a 47-degree angle. And the way that they moved with their hands, this is the force that came out of their hands, and this is why they're tumbling that way. And again, with prediction, saying the way that they're working, the way that they're tucking their hand in, they will successfully do 3 rolls and not 2 rolls. Being able to pause, play, move around, and see things in front of the bodies, it then also gets me excited. I'm learning mathematics, but it's no longer in a textbook or watching a YouTube video that has nothing to do with me. It's in my context and marrying together 2 different subjects or 5 different subjects, but it's in the real world. And that's what the real world, reality is so complex. There's so many things happening that in a school, when everything's divided into this subject is now and that subject is next, to be able to marry them together is something that everybody would like to do, but augmented reality allows me to learn from that and play with reality. So over there, I just said 2 things, like pausing and moving around in 3D.
Sounds like something from Deadpool. As you said, like the movies.
Yeah.
It's pausing, playing, predicting.
Seeing everything, like the Matrix scene.
Yeah.
Like all those different things. But like we can do that with our systems. Oh, I should come back and explain what computer vision is. It's basically machine learning behind the scenes that's taking the feed. So whether it's a camera, usually you like to have depth cameras that can also take depth between them. But you can have a regular RGB camera that is just understanding the world. And computer vision gets to a level where you're like, okay, using the cameras, which is mimicking your eyesight, that's bringing in the photons, bringing the information, I'm now going to process that, and using a computer brain, right, using the AI, I'm going to understand the world around us. So computer vision is the way that the computer sees the world. And with that is where a lot of the magic happens. There's so many things nowadays that you can take a picture of someone and then using AI, let's use that buzzword, but using computer vision and then AI, we're able to understand the depth, we're able to understand the mapping, and we are able to take that 2D and make it 3D. So imagine if I'm walking around, all that information, all the sensors that are coming in from the glasses constantly are making a 3D, an accurate representation of the world, of the room around me, of the gym around me. It's not difficult to snap my fingers and make a movie effect where I pause my classmate, who's now successfully finished her triple backflip. Or maybe she hasn't done it successfully. Maybe she's lying in a heap and she didn't make it. But I can pause that and learn a lot from it. All this information is coming from all the sensors that's happening from the glasses and the world around me, to see all this information and then be able to project in front of me these kind of things that only exist in movies. But I can come to your gym soon and can marry these different subjects. And that's what real education is. It's learning through play. It's manipulating it, touching it, experiencing it, not having subjects compartmentalized. Let's just jump back into the classroom, because we went into the gym classroom for a second. The last thing I have over here with this holograms is like about plants. So let's briefly skim over this. We did talk about it in episode, I think 1 or 2 in the bedroom where we had plants. But again, I think it talks about this idea of ripping apart the anatomy. Over here, we're talking about plants, being able to see different stages, understanding different things, also seeing hidden information. So a plant is very good for that, because I can cut across a plant and see the different subsections on the leaves, on the trunk. I can cut it open, see how old it is without actually cutting open a plant. I can get information on the plant, what species of trees, things like that. But then what's hidden is the roots. Imagine being able to look at a plant, water it, and see that it went from being thirsty to non-thirsty, or seeing how the root system works with other plants. Imagine going out into a nursery or a school trip. I remember CSIRO was a big thing in Australia. We went to this place and we learned all about the science stuff in the classroom, but then we went outside and they had like mini garden and they showed us all the different things. We discovered snails and things like that. That was like a field trip. With augmented reality, field trips just become absolutely mental. The amount of things that you can study and learn and identify just by being in this garden, picking up a snail, and knowing what type it is, looking at a plant, seeing how thirsty it is, being able to understand, oh, that black spot or white spot on the leaf, this is what that disease is called. And if you actually do this over here, you can help it. All these things happen in the real world. My computer vision is identifying the type of plant. When I go close to it, it knows what's the leaf, right? So it's putting that information on the leaf and not just hovering somewhere 500 meters away. It's picking up information in the soil that I might not know, but maybe a research paper came out 3 years ago saying, just with a picture, we can figure out how hungry the plant is. And so now the computer vision can use that research. And when I look at the soil, it can say, maybe water it for 10 seconds now because this plant needs that and it doesn't have that thing. And then maybe when I finish watering it, I see a little smiley face on the plant. And now I've animated the plant and learned. So there's a lot of different things over here that, again, lead into education. And it's not sitting down at a textbook. It's experiencing the world,
Right.
but having all those layers of information, all those layers of education open to me, right in front of me.
I have a question for you.
Sure, shoot.
Like with all that you're saying, specifically about prediction, and when you said field trip and that, and when you were talking about the blocks tumbling or the girl tumbling in her backflips or her somersaults, so much a part of learning is taking risks. There's a part of me that feels resistant to fully jumping into this augmented reality because it can keep me safe always, because I'll be able, if I'm using it in the way that you're describing, I'm not going to move that block without just checking what's going to happen. But part of learning, part of education throughout our life, but particularly when we're kids and throughout high school and that, we need to take risks in order to be able to learn consequence of actions. And that's part of the learning. So my fear or my wonder is whether that element will be removed from education with the system.
It's a great question. I think the first disclaimer I have to give is like, I can't control every single thing that happens on it and what could come bad from that. But having said that, the idea of gymnastics is like, I'm not necessarily seeing it on myself, I'm seeing it on my friend, but I could also see it on myself. Maybe I'm jumping off a board in a swimming pool. I've got a nice 5-10 seconds and I can see airflow or something, something crazy. I think a lot of this is that you can turn things off. The potential of AR is so vast that I think one of the challenges is really, how do you decide what to put on? Because obviously I can't have my lessons from childhood still happening when I'm 20 years old and then having my maps on as well and also seeing physics the entire time. Like, what you're going to see, how every single item is
It'll just be system overload.
Exactly, it'd be system overload. So that's why I think like the world is going to be divided into layers. And I actually have the concept of the whole operating system of augmented reality I call Layer OS. And I take the inspiration from the overhead projectors, the old school projectors where you would put transparent sheets and you would have a drawing of what you would be looking at and the light would shine through it and cast it onto the wall. Imagine what a few of them would look like stacked upon each other. You can make animations out of that, or you can complete a picture. You can take away layers and move layers. And with a few transparent layers, you could stack up into this beautiful image. That's how I see augmented reality, where I don't see it as apps. I see layers of certain experiences. So when you want to see geometry or physics, you'll see that. And you could focus on different cups and see what it's like on there. Would people have that the whole time? There's videos of like cats throwing off a glass. I wonder if people start pushing off glasses, trying to see what the system will model for them. Will people be doing that constantly? Is there room for people to like use it to stop themselves from making mistakes? Potentially. But I think there's so many options that there's also possibility of just failing again and again in a way where it's so cost effective, let's say pretty much free, that I think that people might be actually attempting more simulations. Would they use those simulations to stop making mistakes, or would they use those simulations to learn? I think it's up to everybody. I think it's a similar thing with AI. As you bring down the cost for things that before would have been out of reach for anyone, or billions of dollars to make this query, now it's a couple cents or even free. Are people using it to never think, or they're using it to explore things that they never explored before? I think that comes down to the person. I think
it's both.
Exactly. Augmented reality to me is a tool. It's a visual tool. Oh, well, it's all your senses. It's a tool to connect the digital and real worlds together in a way that is seamless and magical, the possibilities that it opens up will be absolutely massive. You won't be dialed into everything. You will be picking and choosing. I think that will leave some people from making simulations of everything. I think there'll be some people that will make simulations until they learn something and maybe have it on the back end. Some people might just have it come up when I need reinforcement. I had a whole concept of education in my head. I don't know if we're going to have time necessarily today, but it was almost like, what would augmented reality look like if it followed you from childcare, from creche to high school? What would that look like if you had an AI assistant that was like, let's say, sitting on your shoulder, observing everything that you did and creating the next puzzle, the next challenge for you? And what would that look like in helping the teacher? Because I bring this idea of Khan Academy, where they have like a classroom node, a classroom aspect to it. And what I found very interesting about the classroom is what they were saying is, we're not necessarily taking over the teacher. What we've identified is that when a teacher has many students, it becomes overwhelming to help the 1 or 2 students that are struggling and falling behind. And then you have a lot of kids that just don't speak up, and then they end up just falling behind. What Khan Academy was doing with this classroom module type of thing was saying, we have so much data behind you taking the test, taking questions, and going through the units, that we can see exactly where you're struggling, who's struggling, what you're having difficulty, which unit you should rewatch, which videos you should recheck. And what they've actually done is they turned the teacher into a coach, where she has a dashboard now where she can see these kids are all in green, they're doing well, they can keep going. These kids are in red. And actually what they did is they did a chavrusa type of thing where the teacher can now match up a kid that's green and a kid that's in red and have them help each other, bringing them back up. And now it's not a teacher that's teaching only 80% of the class. It's the students are doing the work on their own on the computers. The teacher is the coach going, okay, this is where I need to step in with this student. Now for me, it was like, okay, what happens if every kid had a personal assistant? And this is well beyond I think this was, I don't even want to say when this idea came out, because it's been, wow, over a decade now. But now you have things like ChatGPT, and also if in the brainstreams or in the AI stuff that I was talking about, the iPhone and the personal assistant, I really do think that we're going to each have this agent, this personal assistant for us. That will be our teacher, that will be our travel assistant, all those different cool things. But what would that look like if that followed you from a baby through schooling? Like, it could take it and say, hey, I've seen that you struggled on this puzzle. Let me give you a new puzzle. Or let me make this next puzzle more animated, because maybe you've got a problem with visuals or something, or colors. Imagine the deficiencies it could pick up if it's actually seeing everything that you're doing. Obviously, yes, we can talk about privacy and have those things that only are on your device or things that are only tracking during certain hours of the day. Put privacy aside. Imagine a personal assistant that's using the computer vision, that's using augmented reality to see what's happening and guiding us through our journey. So think about puzzles and think about blocks. Like we have over here is, we could use augmented reality to give a truck a personality. We can make it, just like you have Thomas the Tank Engine, your real wooden truck that you brought to school or that exists here can now look like it's racing around a track and it's blowing smoke, or it has a personality. It's got even just a smile, or is able to speak back to you. Is something so fundamentally different that you don't have that today. When you have kids in an iPad that are playing with all these things and staring at a screen, I think if you brought this out into the 3D world, where that real physical toy that the kid is playing around with, this toy now has a personality or is racing. Like, you remember those racing tracks that you had like electricity and you can like race your cars and like you can make them go and things like that. What would that do? But then on that bigger level, how my AI would then use augmented reality and use these experiences to animate or to give a personality or give a expression, motion to your regular puzzles or your blocks or your trucks or your dolls. It could also use that to help educate me further. The idea of having this little AI that's guiding you or working with you or taking you to school or helping you navigate, which is another episode which we were talking about navigation, follow the leader, of having, imagine a Disney character that's your best friend walking with you to school. That it's not just accompanying you and keeping you entertained, but it's also guiding you. It's your navigation device. It's actually walking with you. It's like, come on, it's this way, for safety, things like that. I guess I just dropped a lot on you. Let's pause for a second. If you have questions or if you think it's nuts, or what are you thinking about that little craziness?
My mind's spiraling in just all different directions. As I said earlier, and you mentioned as well, like the possibilities are just endless. And as I said, I have my reservations because I would want it to always be done within a way that doesn't limit us in our human development at its core, but allows for expansion. And I think that so much of what we spoke about is that expansion of education and of learning and of curiosity and of continued connection with the world around you. And I think that that's pretty magical. So my mind's just like going to all different places of the possible use. And I guess the beauty of it is that it's simulated, and so the possibilities are enormous.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's very important to also pause for a second and reflect that as much beauty as there is, there's also abuse. Virtual reality or augmented reality, the more real they get, and especially augmented reality, the more it blurs your world. I was looking at a video yesterday, and there was a riot in a certain city. Someone had remarked, like, this looks like GTA. And it's like, that goes into the question, like, what are violent video games doing to kids, or what are video games doing to kids? And there's a lot of different things that I see in the world that are as a result of video games and people playing with characters and then trying to enact how far of a character can I play in the real world. I think you get into these very interesting places where something can be so amazing and so educational, but there can also be that abuse side, whether the abuse is coming from society, which is too general of a term and a buzzword, or whether it's coming from your specific school or specific educators, or even your parents. Can that go too far? It's definitely important to pause for a second and say, there is definitely a potential of that. We can definitely see a dystopian part when we marry these worlds, whether it's virtual reality where we're completely immersed, or augmented reality where we're dancing between these two worlds and having the worlds meld. Do we get to a point of not understanding where the real world starts or ends and when the digital world starts? I'm very interested in merging them together.
Right.
But there is definitely that aspect. Can it get too unhinged where the person does not know the boundaries between the real world and the digital world? Definitely abuse can come from that. And I think it's very important to be aware of that.
I think it's good to recognize. I will say, though, overall, my experience now in having spoken this through and learned so much is one of excitement to see where it's going to go, especially having been in the classroom and fought with my students to try and understand the concepts that I was teaching. And some of them were ADD off the walls. And I'm like imagining if I had only had this in my classroom, that would have worked so well for them because it wouldn't have just been theory. And I tried as much as I could to make things as real and lively as possible. But if there was something like this, then for the kids who can't just learn in a linear manner, they have access to information in a way that they never would have been able to absorb. And that's really exciting. It levels the playing field for everyone. It allows for everyone to be able to absorb and to learn and develop. And that's huge. That's massive.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
That's good. I'm happy that you're excited for that. One thing that I would like to see is I definitely see the downsides of just shoving an iPad in your kid's lap and saying, this is your new babysitter. And what I hope, at least in my mind, when I'm very optimistic about the future, I'm hoping that if we're able to properly merge these two worlds together, where it's not, oh, then you were in that world and now you're in a world that's going to overstimulate you. And listen, all the people that have designed and built and directed movies and games and applications that are designed to overstimulate you and get you addicted, we'll have that 10 times, 100 times with these new mediums. But what I'm hoping is when we remove the screen, when we remove that barrier between, okay, now you're in the digital, now you're in the real, when we bring those digital characters in the real world, if we can do it in a seamless way, in a natural way, and bring that magic into this world, I'm hoping that more people will want to develop and design magical experiences that does not rip you away from this world, where you are interacting with the digital world, but you still very much feel like you're in reality. What I'm hoping is that it enhances reality rather than just drags you into the wormhole of a digital world, of a virtual reality world where you're trying to live your life there. And I think it's a very fine line. It's a balance. But I think when you remove those barriers and you bring that, like, for example, like that learning where it's just happening constantly in the background, hopefully we'll not be still in a world where in order to entertain my children, I need to just shove a screen in their faces. Hopefully there'll be more educational experiences that parents will have access to where they can allow their children to enter into these worlds and be explorers rather than just be inanimate, just sitting there and consuming. I'd love to see them be creators. And I think that when you look in AI, when we're starting to create worlds with our words, and this, I can get into a whole tangent of that, because this to me, if you do believe in God, this is literally creation again, right? In Judaism, we believe that God created the world with 10 utterances, and it was specifically words and not just thoughts. It goes into Kabbalistic things. To be able to create with words is something immensely powerful. Once we bring that, we'll soon have kids that are going to be creating their universe and creating their own education and creating products that hopefully these technologies will empower creators rather than consumers, where the world is now. I think that's probably enough to say in that topic. We didn't get a time to go into the outdoors, but we did go into the gym class. There is something about history and exploring. And imagine if you could put a world outside the school. Let's say you're talking about history and you put the Colosseum outside and you all troop outside into the soccer pitch.
Yeah.
And you discover Rome or you discover Australia back in the day, or figure that out in your school thing. I think it'd be cool. I don't think we have enough time to fully get into what that could look like to really experience history in this episode. But I do want to end off with one idea that I saw in a concept video many years ago, and I think is interesting. We've touched upon it a little bit, but the idea of this was to imagine if the wall of your classroom could be turned into almost a window into another classroom. Imagine if you had a sister school or a sister classroom, whether it's in your same city or it's in a different country with children that speak a different language. And imagine if on the other side of that wall allows you to feel like there's just a window between you and another classroom, and you can walk up to it. And now you can draw on the window and send a picture to a girl on the other side of the world. Or you can now speak to another child where you're speaking different languages and you're seeing the translation pop up on the window in front of you, where it's almost like there's a glass panel that just happens to be dividing your classrooms. You're two very different classrooms, very different languages, very different experiences, but this kind of window into the world with augmented reality, every one of you that's wearing your glasses or contact lenses, you can see that classroom from all different directions. So when you move, the perspective changes. You can walk up to it and it's like a massive FaceTime. You can also share, you can play, you can draw, you can discover. If you're learning about plants, maybe the plant in your room, you can point to it, and because they can see it, you can both discover, you can talk about it. You can throw a real building block at the wall, but they can catch a virtual one and then have a game between you. Imagine the type of game, play, education, conversation that could happen if classrooms had this kind of thing. So I just wanted to end it off with that.
Yeah,
I think
a great thought. Makes the world a lot smaller. Yeah. What you're saying is literally making the world smaller and making the world so much vastly bigger at the same time.
People have done experiments with portals. They've put these cameras in squares in certain cities. You can see the camera feed from another city. Maybe in Melbourne can see Paris, and you can have conversations. Where I was a kid, we had pen pals. We would write a letter and maybe a month later we'd get it back.
Yeah.
But imagine pen pals in real time and the kind of experiences that you could have where it's not just writing, it's now play, it's now conversation, it's now learning different things on the side. So I wanted to end off with that. I think there's so much more that we can go into just that idea of making the world smaller and using these technologies to erase barriers, to foster communication that also solves most of the world's problem when you communicate, when you see the other person as a human, as a child, where language is not a barrier. And hopefully your culture and religion start not becoming barriers because you can have that conversation. It's an active thing that we need to be on top of, but that is definitely something that I would like to see. There were more things, like we said, history that I'd like to go into. We might have to make a whole episode on history, but those are a few of the things I wrote down. Is there any last things that you wanted to share with us or speak to the audience in the last minute that we have over here?
I'm thinking for myself and for everyone who's listening is, as you said, this is like scraping the surface of the possibilities.
Yep.
And part of talking about education and creativity, and part of that is just to keep learning and keep exploring. I want to keep learning, keep exploring the possibilities of this in all different facets, particularly in education. Yeah, just to keep that excitement. Yeah, we'll see what happens with it.
Yeah, there's so many possibilities. Yeah. I'm so happy to hear that what you got out of this was excitement. Thank you so much, Shif, for joining me.
Thank you for the time. Thank you so much.
I'll see you guys in the future.